In 1962, the United States was escalating its involvement in Southeast Asia under a veil of secrecy. Officially, American leaders downplayed any serious military role in Vietnam, yet behind the scenes they were deploying advisors and even conducting combat operations. To maintain plausible deniability, the U.S. military often chartered civilian aircraft to transport troops. One such carrier was the Flying Tiger Line, a cargo airline whose planes, with civilian crews and flight attendants, quietly ferried soldiers into the conflict zone. This is the disturbing and largely forgotten story of one such flight. In mid-March 1962, 96 passengers and 11 crew members boarded a Flying Tiger Line Lockheed Super Constellation at Travis Air Force Base in California, bound for Saigon. Among the passengers were 93 U.S. Army personnel and 3 South Vietnamese military officers. These were no ordinary troops. Most were Army Rangers, one of the most elite units in the U.S. Army. Many of the men seemed to sense the gravity of their mission. According to family accounts, several made ominous remarks before departure, as if they feared they would not be coming home. In the tense early days of the Vietnam War, Flight 739 was poised to carry these soldiers into the fray, under circumstances as clandestine as the mission itself. The long journey to Vietnam began on March 14, 1962, when Flight 739 departed Travis Air Force Base in California. Captain Gregory Thomas, an experienced pilot with nearly 20,000 flight hours, led the crew. That is to say, this captain was just about as experienced as possible. The Super Constellation's flight plan included 4 refueling stops across the Pacific: Hawaii, Wake Island, Guam, and the Philippines. The first legs were routine, and after a brief delay in Hawaii to resolve a crew rest issue, the plane continued west. In a twist of fate, all 4 original flight attendants were swapped out in Wake Island for a fresh crew of 4, a chance reassignment that spared those first attendants from what was to come. On March 15th, Flight 739 landed at Andersen Air Force Base, Guam, for its second final stop before heading to Vietnam. The aircraft was refueled and given a quick maintenance check, and at roughly 11:30 p.m. local time, it took off into the night, bound for Clark Air Base in the Philippines. The weather was clear and moonlit as the Constellation climbed to its cruising altitude of 18,000 feet. Over the first couple of hours, the crew made routine radio transmissions to Guam, reporting their position and requesting the altitude change. But sometime after 1:30 a.m., Guam time, on March 16th, all communication from Flight 739 ceased. When the plane missed a scheduled check-in soon after, air traffic controllers grew alarmed. Repeated calls to the aircraft went unanswered. The Air Force in the Philippines scrambled search planes along the route, hoping the flight might have diverted or encountered radio failure. Hours passed with no sign of the missing Constellation. Then came a chilling report. The crew of an American oil tanker sailing in the Philippine Sea had witnessed a mid-air explosion in the sky. 5 crewmen on the tanker described seeing a bright, intensely luminous flash with a white center and reddish-orange edges high above the ocean soon after 1:30 a.m. local time. Notably, this was the very window when Flight 739 would have been passing overhead. They observed 2 flaming objects falling from the sky and hitting the water, leaving only a brief radar blip that quickly vanished. The tanker's captain immediately turned his ship to search the area. For over 5 hours, the vessel scanned the moonlit seas where the fireballs had plunged, but found nothing. By the time dawn broke, it was becoming clear that Flight 739 had met a sudden and catastrophic end. The disappearance triggered one of the largest search and rescue operations in aviation history up to that time. U.S. military and Coast Guard units mounted an 8-day hunt across a vast swath of the Pacific. A total of 1,300 personnel, 48 aircraft, and 8 ships scoured 150,000 square miles of ocean, which in the grand scheme of things is virtually nothing, given the vast expanse. They battled against time and the emptiness of the open sea, looking for a figurative needle in a haystack. Aside from a few unrelated bits of flotsam, such as a piece of driftwood and some stray fuel tank tubing that proved unrelated, the searchers found nothing attributable to the flight. It was as if the aircraft had been swallowed whole by the sea. In the immediate aftermath, the U.S. government provided few concrete answers about what happened to Flight 739. The mission itself was shrouded in secrecy. After all, these troops were being ferried under a contract flight during a period when the U.S. pretended to be only minimally involved in Vietnam. Official press releases confirmed the plane was missing and detailed the extensive search efforts, but gave no explanation for the sudden disappearance. Internally, however, suspicions were already forming. Just 3 days later, an Associated Press report noted that sabotage was already suspected in the mysterious loss of this troop-laden airliner. Flying Tiger Line executives openly voiced their own suspicions. The airline's executive vice president for operations stated to the media that a mid-air explosion couldn't have occurred under normal circumstances. In other words, if Flight 739 exploded in mid-air as the witnesses indicated, something external, a bomb or other device, must have been the cause. While the airline leaned toward sabotage, other ideas floated around in those early days as well. Another speculative theory mentioned in news reports was that the plane could have been hijacked, perhaps to capture the personnel on board. This theory, while presented seriously at the time by the mainstream media, is obviously extremely questionable, and historians have almost completely dismissed it. After all, the idea that a hijacker could subdue nearly 100 Army Rangers seems questionable to say the least. That said, proponents of this now largely discredited theory do like to observe that some of the individuals were communications experts attached to an Army Rangers unit. Given the civilian status of the aircraft, the official inquiry fell to the Civil Aeronautics Board rather than a military tribunal. The board conducted a detailed investigation into the disappearance, but without wreckage to examine, their conclusions were limited. In April 1963, a full year after the incident, the CAB released its accident report. It acknowledged that all evidence indicated that the aircraft was destroyed in flight. However, the report admitted that, due to the complete lack of physical evidence, the board was unable to determine the exact fate of Flight 739. In the absence of an official cause, numerous theories have emerged over the decades to explain the flight's fate. The most prevalent theory is sabotage. The circumstantial evidence supporting this is compelling. Flight 739 was carrying a large team of skilled military specialists on a secret assignment, making it a high-value target for anyone who might want to thwart U.S. operations in Vietnam. Investigators found that security around the plane during its stops was lax. At the Guam airfield, for instance, the aircraft was left unattended in a dimly lit area for a significant period of time during refueling. It wouldn't have been difficult for an infiltrator to slip aboard or hide an explosive in the cargo hold during that window. The vivid mid-air explosion observed by the tanker crew strongly suggests a sudden, catastrophic event, consistent with a bomb. Even Flying Tiger Line officials, as noted, believed an onboard bomb was the most plausible explanation, given that no known mechanical issue could have caused such a violent breakup. No individual or group ever claimed responsibility, but it's worth noting the geopolitical context. In early 1962, various communist insurgencies and their sympathizers had strong motive to strike a blow against American forces. Another theory, which can't be entirely discounted, is that the plane was struck down by an enemy action which was either intentional or unintentional. The tanker crew's account included seeing what they described as a vapor trail or streak in the sky just before the explosion. That detail has led to conjecture about a possible missile strike. Some have speculated that Soviet or Chinese forces may have shot the plane down, and that there was a cover-up to prevent significant escalation at a flashpoint in world affairs. Another even more disturbing theory has speculated that it may have been accidentally taken down in a friendly fire incident, and that the matter was silently covered up. One of the enduring frustrations surrounding Flight 739 is the veil of secrecy and lack of documentation. Because the flight was a civilian charter, the U.S. military technically had no official report to file about its loss, or at least none they have been willing to share. Over the years, family members and journalists have filed inquiries and Freedom of Information Act requests. These requests have been filed with the Army, Air Force, Defense Department, State Department, and CIA, attempting to uncover records about the incident. However, in essence, no results whatsoever have been obtained, and this has led to speculation of a cover-up. For the families of the 107 people on Flight 739, the tragedy was compounded by decades of uncertainty and official indifference. These soldiers and crew vanished en route to a war zone, yet their names never appeared on any honor roll of war dead. The reason was disturbingly cold and bureaucratic for men who had given their lives to serve, so buckle up for this reasoning. Because they perished outside the defined combat zone, the Department of Defense deemed them ineligible for inclusion on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. This technicality deeply hurt the families, who felt their loved ones had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to the Vietnam War effort. Also, big shout out to Senator Gary Peters, who attempted to have them added to the memorial in 2021. The ultimate fate of Flight 739 remains one of the greatest mysteries from the early days of the Vietnam War. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to check out my other channels for contemporary mysteries and true crime content. The links are in the description of this video. Also, be sure to take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video with the history fans in your life. Sean Flynn was no ordinary war photographer. He was the only son of swashbuckling film star Errol Flynn and actress Lily DeMita, a young man of significant Hollywood pedigree who traded movie sets and luxury for battlefields. In the mid-1960s, after a brief acting career, Sean became a freelance photojournalist under contract with Time magazine. By his late 20s, he had embedded himself with U.S. Army Special Forces units on dangerous missions, venturing into remote combat zones in search of extraordinary images. Determined, he parachuted alongside troops and trekked through jungles, camera in hand, to capture the raw reality of the Vietnam War. This daring lifestyle would eventually lead him to the most perilous assignment of his life. In early 1970, the neighboring conflict in Cambodia was escalating. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces had pushed across the borders, and Cambodia was spiraling into civil war. Sean Flynn, always drawn to the front lines, headed to Cambodia on assignment for time, as the turmoil intensified. On April 6, 1970, Flynn and a friend, 32-year-old photojournalist Dana Stone, set out from Phnom Penh, the Cambodian capital, on what would be their final ride. That morning, they learned of a makeshift checkpoint on Highway 1, reportedly manned by Viet Cong guerrillas. While most journalists prudently traveled in a convoy of cars, Sean and Dana opted for motorcycles, hoping to navigate the war-torn roads quickly and get a first-hand look at the action. The pair rode east toward the danger zone, determined and perhaps a bit unwilling to miss a scoop. As they neared the checkpoint, the two men encountered a group of armed individuals along the dusty highway. According to later witness accounts, Sean and Dana paused to speak with what appeared to be Viet Cong fighters, trying to assess the situation. Then, in an instant, their luck ran out. The fighters at the roadblock abruptly seized the journalists, pulling them off their bikes and escorting them toward the tree line. It was broad daylight on a rural road, yet in that tense moment, Sean Flynn and Dana Stone effectively vanished. Villagers recalled seeing the men led away into the jungle, but none could intervene, and after that, neither man was ever seen again. The disappearance of such high-profile journalists sent a chill through the press community covering the war. Flynn and Stone were not the only ones to meet danger on Highway 1 that spring. In the following 2 weeks, around 10 other journalists and travelers were captured or slain on the same stretch of road by communist forces operating in the area. Cambodia was becoming one of the most hazardous places on Earth for reporters. Still, the abrupt vanishing of Sean Flynn, a charismatic former actor turned war photographer, seized public attention. He was 28 years old, and his fate, along with Stone's fate, were haunting question marks. When Sean failed to return, frantic efforts were launched to find him. His mother, Lily Demita, immediately sprang into action, funding search parties, pleading with authorities, and spending a fortune in the desperate hunt for her only child. Despite exhaustive efforts, no definitive news emerged, and years dragged on with no word of ransom, no confirmed sightings, nothing. In 1984, after 14 years of agony and uncertainty, Lily finally had Sean Flynn declared legally dead in absentia. She would pass away a decade later, never learning what truly happened to her son. Over the years, various accounts and theories have tried to answer the question of what happened to Sean. The most widely accepted theory is chilling. According to multiple reports, Flynn and Stone were captured that day by Vietnamese communist forces and eventually handed over to the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge, Cambodia's ruthless revolutionary faction, had little mercy for captives. If this is true, it's believed that the two journalists were held captive for some time, perhaps as long as a year, before meeting a violent end at the hands of their captors. This would essentially be the worst fate imaginable for Flynn and Stone. Essentially, under the Khmer Rouge, they would have suffered from man-made horrors beyond human comprehension. Another theory that was initially popular suggested that they were kidnapped for ransom. However, as the days and years went by, this became increasingly unlikely. Still yet another theory suggests that they were saved from the terrors of the Khmer Rouge and simply slain by the communists in the wooded area on the roadside. Crucially, no physical evidence has ever confirmed the two men's fate. The story of Apache, a reputed female Vietnamese sniper during the Vietnam War, has become one of the Vietnam War's greatest historical mysteries. She's often cited in connection with the legendary U.S. Marine sniper Carlos Hathcock, who claimed to have encountered and ultimately eliminated her. Yet much debate surrounds whether she was a historical individual, a composite figure, or perhaps even a complete fiction. While there's widespread anecdotal evidence in Western sources, especially among American veterans, the lack of verifiable Vietnamese records has led some to question her existence. Hathcock alleged that Apache was a skilled Viet Cong sniper, known for her brutality, including the torture of captured Marines. According to his recollection, this female fighter earned the nickname Apache because of her penchant for mutilating American prisoners. Critics point out that first-hand documentation of Apache's existence remains elusive outside of oral testimony and veteran anecdotes. If she really had been a high-profile Viet Cong sniper, there might have been at least some formal records from the North Vietnamese. Historians have noted that the People's Army of Vietnam tended to keep fairly detailed records, including information about decorated snipers and specialized units. However, the Viet Cong, while fighting under the direction of North Vietnam, wasn't officially part of the People's Army of Vietnam. Further, the Viet Cong was composed of regular units, which may have had better record keeping, and guerrilla units, which almost certainly didn't. Skeptics argue that if she were as infamous as described, there should be at least some trace in Vietnamese archives. Further, they argue that if she had existed, she would have been lauded by the North Vietnamese for propaganda purposes. On the other hand, defenders of the historical Apache theory point to the nature of guerrilla warfare. The Viet Cong operated in covert cells, with fighters often using pseudonyms to hide their identities from both the enemy and even their allies, if operational security demanded it. Under such conditions, it's plausible that a female sniper could have operated without leaving an extensive paper trail. Moreover, the massive destruction and confusion that accompanied the Vietnam War might mean that some documentation, if it ever existed, was destroyed or lost. This argument suggests that the absence of evidence is not definitive proof of her non-existence. Also, according to the official narrative, she was a figure deeply feared by the Americans that was killed in action. Any acknowledgement of this would have had the potential to damage North Vietnamese and Viet Cong morale. Beyond the question of official documentation, some argue that cultural and political motives could also explain why Vietnamese records remain silent about an infamous female sniper. In post-war Vietnam, narratives about female fighters often highlighted revolutionary heroism and sacrifice. It's true that women played significant roles, both overt and covert, in the war. However, the story of a female fighter who engaged in torturous behavior might not align with the idealized depiction of female revolutionaries in official accounts. Hence, it's possible that even if a female sniper committed such acts, her story wouldn't be included in state-sanctioned narratives that emphasize moral righteousness and heroic conduct. Further, there's nothing in Hathcock's story that suggests that she was a particularly prolific sniper. Her reputation was because of the horrible acts she committed against prisoners of war. Again, the Vietnamese may not have wished to play up the role of such an individual in the post-war period, especially given attempts to normalize relations with America. There's also the perspective that Apache might have been a symbolic figure, or even an amalgamation of multiple female snipers. Some veterans have suggested that stories about Apache circulated as a means of personifying the fear and anger many Marines felt when confronted with a savage battlefield. War, with its countless rumors and secondhand stories, can inflate real events into powerful legends. It's not uncommon for a single, tangible enemy combatant to become a boogeyman figure, someone who encapsulates the worst fears and horrors of conflict. The psychological impact of facing an adversary reputed to be exceptionally cruel could have enhanced her legend over time. Meanwhile, those who served with Carlos Hathcock remained steadfast that Apache was, in fact, a real person. According to multiple eyewitness accounts, Hathcock became determined to take her out after witnessing the brutal torture she supposedly inflicted on captive Marines. In the well-known telling, he successfully eliminated her at a distance of over 700 yards, ending her reign of terror. Further, and importantly, his spotter verified the reality of the event itself, though couldn't directly verify who the woman was. While this anecdote relies heavily on personal testimonies, supporters say the consistency of these accounts lends credibility to the story. Still, from a strictly historical standpoint, anecdotal evidence alone can't serve as conclusive proof. Oral testimonies are subject to memory lapses, exaggerations, and the influence of retelling across decades. Further, Carlos Hathcock is in essence a mythic figure in his own right, and people like this have the tendency to have a reality-altering aura surrounding them. The mystery of Apache boils down to a clash between the fog of war and the rigid demands of historical proof. On one hand, the anecdotal evidence, especially from Carlos Hathcock and various Marine veterans, suggests she was a real fearsome female Viet Cong sniper. On the other, a lack of verifiable documentation raises legitimate doubts, and it's no secret that war stories can morph into legend over time. Given what we know, there's enough credibility in those first-hand accounts to keep her story alive.